and the topic I'm going to speak about today is Vygotskian Autotelic agents, and more specifically, how language can be used as a cognitive tool for autonomous artificial agents. So before I start, I just want to quickly thank all my collaborators. So the Flowers Lab in France, my amazing PhD advisors, as well as all of my co-authors. So one extraordinary property of child development is that children spend a lot of time spontaneously exploring their environment. And they are never really externally told to do so. Instead, they are driven by what psychologists call intrinsic motivations and what we, in everyday language, call curiosity. So from very early stages of their development, children learn to invent and pursue their own problems. And as they grow and become adults, these problems become more and more complex. And this way, humans learn what we call open-ended repertoire of skills. And what's particularly interesting with those skills is that they are expressed in several modalities. So they can be proprioceptive, visual, or auditory, but also they are expressed with different level of abstractions. So for instance, I can set to myself some really concrete goals, such as pouring myself a cup of coffee in the morning, but I can also be more ambitious and aim at other types of goals, such as doing good research, which is way more abstract. So a number of teams in the world have now worked for a while on trying to model this unique development and also on how it could be transferred to artificial autonomous agents. And in this talk, I'm going to present a framework that allows to design intrinsically motivated agents inside a reinforcement learning setup. So here in this slide, you can see the classical reinforcement learning loop, where we have an experimenter that is going to set a goal to an agent. And this experimenter has also designed a reward function which corresponds to this goal. And then the agent is going to observe its environment and take actions so as to maximize the rewards it can collect in the environment. And doing so, it will be able to reach the goal that the experimenter defined. So note that in this classical reinforcement learning loop, the goals and the rewards are external to the agents. They are externally provided. And if we want to design intrinsically motivated learner, this is something that we don't want. We want the agent to have internalized these goals and rewards. So in the framework that I'm going to present that we call autotelic learning, the agent not only have to learn to pursue goals, it also have to learn how to represent them and how to generate them. So we call this from autotelic learning, and the autotelic comes from the Greek auto, which means self, and telos, which means goals. And to sum up, autotelic learning is used to describe the autotelic agents that are intrinsically motivated to do four things. So represent their goal, generate them, pursue, and master them. And these agents, they have a meta objective, which is to learn as many goals as possible. So basically to grow an open-ended repertoire of skills. So how does autotelic learning concretely work? So the agent is going to observe a context and it's going to sample a goal. It's going to try to pursue this goal and take actions in the environment to do so. But sometimes it might fail or sometimes it might succeed. But the agent needs to know how well it performs. So it's going to use an internal reward function that's going to tell him how good it is at solving goals. And once it has done these three steps, the agent can use the scores that he calculated thanks to its reward function, as well as all the collected experience in order to update its internal models and start looping again. So this setup is now being used by many teams in the world, and it allows to basically design autonomous agents that acquires various skills, but they have a common drawback, which is the fact that they often target really specific goals, which are some configurations in the environment, or sometimes maybe specific trajectories to match. And also, when we use goal generators inside these agents, even if we use incentives to our novelty, when we sample new goals, the sampling often occurs within the distribution of known effects. And this is something that we don't really like, because if we were to design real autonomous agents, we would like them to continuously explore new things. And so we would like them to generate out of distribution goals. And it turns out that in this process, children use language as a creative tool. Indeed, Piaget first discovered that children use the egocentric speech as a way to narrate their ongoing activities. But then later, Vygotsky showed that this form of egocentric speech was more an internalization of the social speech that was then used by children in order to generate plans for exploration. And indeed, language is compositional by nature, and it can push the limits of the known towards new constructions. And I think that the famous sentence by Noam Chomsky, colorless green ideas sleeps furiously, is a good example of that. So what's amazing with language is that if I know two concepts, such as a cat and a bus, I can easily combine them together to form a new concept, which is a cat bus. And amazingly, this cat bus, I can easily picture it, what it would look like in my mind. So then a natural question that comes to mind is, are we able to use language in autotelic agents so as to generate out of distribution goals? And this is precisely what we investigated with our learning system that we called Imagine. So Imagine is an autotelic agent that has two learning phases. A first one, where it's basically going to interact with a social partner in order to learn to represent goals using language. So this step can be viewed as the internalization of the social speech that Vygotsky described, for instance. And then there is a second phase in which the agent is not going to interact with the social partner anymore. Instead, it's going to generate new goals by recombining the constructs, the words that it learned thanks to the social partner. So let me give you a bit more details about imaging. And I'm going to first talk about the first phase, so the language acquisition phase. So as I just mentioned, language acquisition is performed thanks to interaction with the social partner. So if I come back to the small diagram that I showed you earlier with the classical reinforcement learning loop, you can see now that we have a third protagonist in the loop, which is the social partner. So let's zoom in a bit on how this social partner interacts with our agent. So for our experiment, we designed a small environment that we call Playground. And Playground is a 2D continuous world which is made of procedurally generated scenes with an important variety of objects. And as you can see in this small video here, the agent can interact with those objects. And among the interactions that we implemented, we have some compositional dynamics. For instance, the agent can bring food or water to an animal in order to make it grow. And similarly, it can bring water to plants to make them grow. And the role of the social partner inside this environment is to notify the agent when it does something interesting inside this environment. And this social partner is going to provide the description at the end of each episode. So now that you know more about the interactions between the social partner and the agents, let's zoom in the internal models of the agents. So if you remember when I talked about autotelic agents, these are agents that need to internalize goals. So they need a way to generate their own goals. And for that, we use a simple mechanism which consists of basically storing all the descriptions provided by the social partner at the end of the episodes. And at the beginning of the next episode, the agent is simply going to sample in this memory a new goal for exploration. We also need a reward function in order for the agent to notice when a certain goal is fulfilled. And for that, we use a binary classifier, which is simply going to be trained on a data set of a pair's state of description. and it's going to learn to detect if a description matches a certain state. So it's a simple way of aligning the descriptions with the states in which they were communicated. Now we need a third module inside our agent. It's the policy in order to be able to pursue the goals. And this policy is going to be trained using standard goal condition reinforcement learning and using the signal of the reward function that I just presented you as a training signal. So if we follow this procedure, we can see that we will have an agent that will be able to learn a repertoire of skills which contains all the descriptions that the social partner communicated. But if we stop here, we are a bit frustrated because this repertoire of skill is not open-ended. It will be basically made of the description communicated by the social partner. So that's why we turn to the second phase, which is called goal imagination. And in goal imagination, the agent is simply going to leverage the compositionality of language and form new linguistic constructions from the description he learned thanks to the social partner. So even though this idea is quite simple, goal imagination involves two important challenges. So the first one is that we want to generate descriptions which have a sufficient probability of being meaningful in our environment. Indeed, if I randomly mix words that were communicated by the social partner, chances are that I'm going to generate meaningless sentences with repeated words or bad ordering of words or things like that. And the second challenge that we have to address is that we need a reward functions that generalize on these meaningful goals. Indeed, if our reward function does not generalize, it can be catastrophic for learning. And I've shown a small illustration here where we can see that if we feed the description grow green tree to our reward function with a state that indeed is where our agent is indeed growing a tree, and if we have this reward function that does not generalize, it's going to say that it's not a match, and then it's going to provide a wrong signal to our policy, and our agent will basically not be able to learn about this goal. So in order to tackle the first challenge, we use the construction grammar framework that is used to model child language acquisition with pattern imitation and discovery of word equivalent classes. So basically, we will be able to infer the grammar of the language of the social partner, and we will be able to see that some words can be swapped together in order to form new constructions. And this view of generating new goals thanks to construction grammar is quite consistent with the definition of creativity given by Simonton, and I think that Natalie also used in her previous talk, which is creativity is a trade-off between novelty and appropriateness. And in our case, thanks to construction grammar, we can define what linguistic creativity would be about. So it would be generating new utterances, so new utterances that are novel, from a known grammar, so which are appropriate. To tackle the second challenge about reward function generalization, we use inductive biases inside our learning architecture. And those inductive biases are object factor model as well as attention mechanisms. So now moving on to the result section. We can see that if we allow our agent to imagine goals, it allows him to grow its repertoire of skills. And in order to test that, we defined a set of testing goals that were never communicated by the social partner. So what it means is that during the first phase, we purposefully prevent the social partner from communicating descriptions involving growing plants simply. And then we test our agent on these goals and see if they are able to to solve them. And if we indeed imagine, use imagination during learning, we can see that the set of goals that the agent masters is wider than if we do not imagine the green curve. We also look at how good our imagination is for exploration. And for that, we simply use a count of interesting interaction in the environment as a proxy to measure that. And we can see here again that goal imagination is good for exploration. And when testing for generalization on the set of description involving growing plants, we observed an interesting feature about our imagine architecture. On this feature, we called it behavioral adaptation. So if you remember, in playgrounds, we have two different dynamics depending on the object we look at. So for instance, if we want to make animals grow, we can bring them either food or water. Whereas if we want to make plants grow, we only use water. And the thing that is amazing with this imagine architecture is that it understands that it should not be bringing food to plants, and it will, because they won't grow this way. So apparently my small video here is not working, but here if we put the agent in a confusing setup where we have water and food in the same scene, we can see that if it wants to grow the green plant, it will bring it to the water instead of bring it to the food. And this feature is only observable if we use imagination. And in order to understand what's taking place, I did these two diagrams here. And we can see that if we don't use goal imagination, we will simply feed the testing description of growing, for instance, a green tree. And this description will directly flow inside the policy of our agent. And this means that our agent will directly try to transfer what it has learned from animals to plants. And in this situation, it's going to try to bring the plants some food. Whereas if we use goal imagination, the description is going to flow through the reward function. And this will allow to self-train the policy and realize that if I bring food to a plant, nothing happens. So now, in order to conclude, I just want to mention a few limitations about our architecture and also open on some perspectives. So first limitation that we can notice is that in our systems, we use synthetic grammar. And if we were to use real and natural language, I think that our goal imagination heuristic based on construction grammar is not really likely to scale to the high combinatoriality of natural language. Another limitation that we can observe is that the imagination procedure that we implemented is not really grounded, which means that the agent is not observing the scene before trying to imagine a new goal. And this is not really compatible with how children learn new interactions, because they are likely to base the plan that they set to themselves based on the affordances that they have in their environment. And a final limitation is the fact that our imagination mechanism is really tied to the competence of the agents, because we saw that everything is about the reward functions that is able to understand when a new construction is fulfilled in the environment. And again, this is not really consistent with how children function when they are during pretend play, for instance, because we know that sometimes they invent really unachievable goals, but these goals are really useful to constrain the exploration and to form new plans. And finally, about the perspectives that I mentioned. So if we look at language in humans, we can see that it's really a multifaceted tool that is used for many purposes. It's used for communication, but it's also used in an internalized way for cognition. And the set of cognitive functions that we can, where we can use language is really diverse. And in the scope of this talk, we mainly saw that it was useful for creativity and imagination, but we could imagine that we would be at some point able to design autonomous agents that have a rich linguistic mental life, and that could use language for many other cognitive functions. And I think it would be pretty cool to have this kind of agents. So in my talk, there's mainly 3 messages. So we show that we have a framework to have to design autotelic learners inside a reinforcement learning setup. We saw that thanks to language, we can aim out of distribution goals, which is really interesting in terms of creativity, for instance. And finally, there is this idea that we could at some point implement Vygotskian Autotelic agents that showcase a rich mental linguistic life. Thank you very much for listening to me, and I'll be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you so much, Tristan.